So we're debugging things. And if you're used to Visual Studio, well, most of the debugging things that you're used to work just as they previously did. So for example, the autos window, the locals window, they all act in pretty much the same fashion. The only exception is that, for example, here we're passing arrays, like an array of ints, and you cannot open up this array here and see all the values. That's probably the only difference to point out. Now, in addition to the Visual Studio 2 windows, you also get other two windows for GPU-specific debugging. So, for example, we have the CUDA info window here, and this actually gives us information about where you are in the execution process. We also have something called a CUDA Warp Watch, which you can find if you go to Nsight Windows, CUDA Warp Watch. Let's open up one of these. Now, this is similar to a watch window that you would have in Visual Studio. The only exception is that you get to see the states of the variables in a so-called warp, and we'll talk a bit about that later. Meanwhile, what I can do is, if I want to look at the values of the array A here, what I can do is I can type A at I, like so. Now, at the moment, A at I does not have a value because we're at this line and we should be at this line. But if I now debug right up to, so I do run to cursor, so I run to this line and suddenly I can see the values of A. So A is an array of 5 elements with the values 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And finally, as you may have guessed, when we hit a breakpoint on the GPU, in this GPU kernel, we're actually debugging only on a particular thread. And the question is, well, what about the other threads? Well, to switch to a different thread, you can use yet another tool called CUDA Debug Focus. So let's go into Nsight Windows, CUDA Debug Focus. Now, this window has the information about the execution environment. So for instance, here it's telling me that we executed just one block. So because the dimensions are 1 by 1 by 1, there's just one block, which contains 5 by 1 by 1 threads. And we're currently on thread 0. And I could jump to thread 1, for example, and press OK. And now we're still in a breakpoint on the exact same line, but we're now in a different thread. And we can confirm that by looking at the thread index. You see it's 1, whereas it was previously 0. And this is the way that you can navigate from one thread to another to see the internal state of the variables for that thread.